Hi, Robyne. How are you today?
I'm good.
Awesome.
Hi, Jen.
Thank you for coming in. So today I'm sitting down and talking with Robyne Davidson, who is well known to the pulse world, but your most recent position is as the what at Lakeland College?
Technically, the Pulse and Special Crop Research Scientist for Lakeland College.
Awesome. Which is actually kind of evolved because as the provincial government exited, so Robyne used to be with Alberta Agriculture.
Yeah.
And has now transitioned. So you are no stranger to Alberta Pulse and to our members.
Yes.
I think I first met you a really, really long time ago when you were working with Dr. Kamfa Chang on Micros for a Little Bright.
That's
right.
right. Yeah, exactly.
So Robyne's familiar with peas. You had a huge lentil project.
Yeah.
We worked on faba beans.
Yep.
But today I want to talk about lupins.
Okay.
And the lupin project that we are co-funding with Ardar.
Yep.
And so kind of first things we've heard a lot of there's been a lot of excitement and questions and rumors even about lupins and their potential. Yeah. So maybe as just kind of a starting off point, can you give us a bit of context about the crop, where it's grown, kind of what we think maybe the potential is for Alberta? We have a bit of a history with it. Yeah. Anyway.
Yeah. Well, lupin is a crop that is far more popular in Australia and Europe than it is here. I think they've been playing around with lupins for quite a long time. Any of the lupin varieties that we get, they're coming from there, Jen. They're coming from the breeders over there, mostly in Europe, but again, like I said, Australia also does quite a bit in lupins. So that's where it first kind of caught our eye. We started playing around with them probably 2004, 2005. There was a couple of varieties that came over that we were looking at, and it was like, hey, what is this? This is kind of cool. This is a pulse crop, right? So we started playing around with it, and we got a little bit of information, and then we started trying to grow that industry a little bit, and we ran into some significant market issues. And we're like, okay, well, back to the drawing board. So then we focused, like you said, on lentils and fabas, because one of the things that, I like to do is try to keep, things on the back burner, like always trying to build the industry. So we started looking at them again, probably in 15, 16, 17. And again, gleaned a little bit of information and got some good research data from it. But now we have something different happening. It's called the protein highway and the plant-based products that consumers are asking for. So that's what brought lupin back, I think, to the forefront, was that we now have a crop that has a potential in a market that has itself huge potential.
Okay, so just for context, when we're thinking about the pulse crops, peas are kind of sitting at that 20, 22, some up to 24, 25% protein.
Yeah.
Faba beans would be our next at 30-ish, 28 to 30?
20, even a little higher, 32.
Okay, and so where are we sitting at lupin for percentage
Lupins start at about where faba beans end, so
okay.
about 32% protein. And we have a couple of varieties that are as high as 40.
Okay.
So that's why people are excited
so
about
super
lupins.
Cool. So this whole fractionation industry as it gets built, and awesome. Okay, now the particular lupins that we're looking at are, people grow lupins in their gardens, and there's yellow flowers and blue flowers and white flowers, but we've already got some learnings in that space. So can you talk a little bit about the varieties that we know work well here?
Yes. Yeah, it is not the beautiful flowers that grow purple and pink and vibrant, especially in the area where I come from.
Right.
In the Maritimes, lupins are everywhere.
Are they a weed?
They are. They're like a native plant, and they grow in the ditches, and they grow like 5 or 6 feet tall. They're just gorgeous. Crazy. We used to put our kids in there and take pictures in the lupins when we went home to visit. But these are definitely a very different type of lupin. I would call those as the native lupins, and they have alkaloids in them, which are substances that animals and humans cannot process without getting very sick. So the type of lupins that we're talking about, Jen, are what, I call them domesticated lupins, if you will. So the alkaloids have been bred out, and they've been basically focused at consumption and use by humans and animals as well. So there's a white lupin, which is very popular and has a lot of potential, especially in the processing world, because it's a big seed and they like that. There's blue lupin, which agronomically is probably one of the ones that is easier to grow. And then there's a yellow lupin. Now, the yellow lupin we have not brought in to Alberta or even into Canada. It just seems to be kind of out there. There's not a lot of interest in looking at it in the for processing or for breeding either. The focus is with the white, and for us, the blues are the ones that have got our attention the most.
Okay, so I mean, obviously we're sitting here talking about them so that we know that there's interest. We've got some seed producers who are working at seed, but really for this to be successful, agronomy and best management practices are really going to kind of be the foundation for our ability to produce this. So that's kind of where you come in and your project. So some basic best management practices. So what are the kind of things that you're looking at? And any learnings? I know the project is wrapping shortly, and so we should have some more definitive answers about some of the the statistical differences. But can you give us kind of a general overview of what you've looked at and what you've found?
Sure. We started with the basics, Jen. When you're bringing a crop into an area, you kind of have to start with the basics and figure out how to even grow them so that you can test them, right? And look at all of those different parameters. So we started with, the seeding rates and seeding dates and how do you inoculate these things, right? They are a pulse crop that need inoculants. We played around with that a little bit. What happens if you don't inoculate them, and kind of the basic stuff. And we learned we now have targeted seeding rates that we can aim. We know that from growing them that clean seed, clean fields are very important. So we have been working quite closely and quite intently on herbicide packages and how to keep the fields nice and clean. And what diseases come along with, when you plant them in the field for a few years, what happens? What shows up? And are these new diseases? Are they diseases, and how hard are they to manage? And then the whites in particular tend to be a little bit longer season. So where do they fit? Are they longer than faba beans? Are they the same as faba beans? How do you desiccate them? When should you desiccate them? Things like that. So some of the really basic stuff, just learning how to grow them, how deep to seed them, how to inoculate them, what kind of herbicides can we use, what kind of herbicides are a no-go. Things like how would you put it into a rotation, and how do you desiccate them, and when, and what diseases are there. And one of the ones that is big in the industry right now is Phanomyces in peas. Well, what happens? Are they susceptible to? So some of those basic questions to just kind of get us off the ground and figure out how to even grow them so that we can test them.
Awesome. Okay. So if we were going to give a bit of context, because we know, peas we can pretty much grow everywhere. Dry beans are definitely southern Alberta. Is there a location or a region or an ecozone, soil zone, whatever, that lupins are better suited to?
Yes, well, it depends a little bit on the type that we're talking. I talk about whites and blues.
Okay.
In general, they are a cooler season crop, so they like it cool. So they don't like 25, 28 degrees. Mm-hmm. So we're trying to focus on maybe some of the central Alberta areas for that. They don't particularly do well in drought either, so they like quite a bit of moisture. I'd say maybe not quite as much as fabas, but they do require quite a bit. So again, you don't want to be putting them in really light sandy soils with low precipitation in those areas. Alkalinity is one that's kind of showing up too, that caught us off guard. They don't like alkaline soils. They like the more acidic soils. So in some ways that makes it a little bit more appropriate to go down a little bit further into southern Alberta. But again, then you have water issues, so it is kind of one of those things. So I think overall I would say it's a cooler season crop that likes cooler temperatures and quite a bit of water and a fairly open window to grow in. If you have a longer fall, it's a little bit better. But again, you gotta be careful that you don't get really high organic matter or like the super neutral, soils or higher.
Okay. So there will be some definite boundaries where lupins are more successful.
Yes, for sure. And the blues, I think maybe agronomically what we've learned is in the bigger picture, the blues are probably more suited to Alberta climate as a whole, because you can take those up to the peace as well. And so we're focusing a little bit more on those, but we cannot forget about the whites. So we'll continue to work with those as well.
So maybe some options and a bit of diversification type of opportunities. Okay, now if we're thinking about, you mentioned Aphanomyces, and one of the promising things about lupins is that perhaps it could be a pulse crop option in a rotation that is not susceptible in the same way. What I've heard is it kind of similar to faba bean, that maybe Aphanomyces can colonize, but it won't reproduce and it won't impact the yield. So that's good news for us, because we won't actually be increasing the spore load in the soil. But obviously that's important to verify in our condition. So that's a part of what you're doing too.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you look at, the greenhouse work and the academic work and that we can pull out of Europe and Australia, it looks as though they are quite resistant. I would say very resistant to Aphanomyces. And so far, in the past couple of years, when we have tested that in the field, because what happens in the greenhouse and in the lab is very different than what can happen in the field. So far, that is holding. Now, 2021 was a drought, so we didn't have a lot of disease to test it, but we had quite a bit of rain in 2022, especially in June, across the province. So we were able to test that, and I would say right now it's looking very promising that they are resistant to Aphanomyces. So
cool.
That's very exciting too.
It is
for the industry.
You mentioned pH as being really important and can result in crop failure. We talked about drought. So kind of, if I was going to give a summary of our lupin research story to date, I would say, there's been just as many fails as there has been successes, which in some ways is really good because we're kind of, we're defining the areas of our box. So you mentioned that lupins is a cool season crop. When is it flowering?
It actually flowers a little sooner than peas.
So would we actually be avoiding some of that summer heat that can cause flower blast from peas?
Yeah,
okay,
for sure.
That's totally just a Jen curiosity question. I was like, wait a minute. Can we actually play with our timing a little bit?
It kind of depends. Like I said, sometimes the plants are, they grow quite a bit vegetatively, and then they flower. The past couple of years in the drought situations, they've been flowering very early.
Okay, so
determinant? It depends a little bit. Yes.
Determinant?
Yes. Yeah.
So vegetative growth, then reproductive growth. I'm just kind of thinking about a little bit of what the plant actually looks like. So when we're talking about height, kind of...
It varies again quite a bit.
Okay.
But I would say in general the plots are knee to mid-thigh.
Yeah.
Yeah. Height for a really happy looking blue lupin. The whites will be taller.
Okay.
The whites can get waist height.
Okay.
Yeah, and bigger leaves.
Pods. Where are the pods located?
Near the top.
Near the top.
Yes.
So we're thinking harvest ease.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Lodging? Is lodging an issue?
We have a woody stem in both types.
Okay.
And so we're talking woody, like solid, very strong stem.
Okay.
Lodging, not an issue.
Not an issue.
Not an issue at all, no.
Okay, so that longer season is maybe not an issue for a harvest, for going down, we're wind resistant. That's a lot of pluses. Yeah.
Shattering can be a little bit of an issue if you leave them too long.
Okay.
So like any pulse crop, you just got to keep your eye on that. I mean, peas will shatter too.
Yeah.
Especially if you get into a wet, dry cycle.
Yeah.
And lupins are a little finicky that way. So you just have to, again, when we say special crops, you have to keep an eye on them and just, be aware that they can still look pretty green, not unlike lentils, can still look very green and yet have very ripe pods.
Okay.
If you don't get down there.
Well, and that's why we love that you get to play with all of these things in
fun.
a small plot, and then kind of on a few, a smaller scale than, a farmer trying this. So if we're thinking kind of right back to the beginning, and we want to walk through a bit of maybe a comparison, say, with like a lupin and a pea. So pea, we're probably planting kind of that first week of May to second week of May. Yeah. Maybe faba beans a little bit on the early side of that. A lupin would be
right around the same time as fabas.
Okay.
Yeah. Again, not as quite as critical to get them in as soon as we try to get our fabas in. But if you had to choose, seed your lupins, then your peas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, for some of our crops, say like a soybean, which is a C4, or a dry bean, where we're wanting to put it into warm soil, does soil temperature impact seeding time?
A little bit, just a little bit.
Okay.
Just not so much. They're still, because they're a cool season crop, they still do quite well in the cooler soils.
Okay.
They don't mind, but they do have that very different emergence, similar to a bean, where they actually have to pull their whole head out.
So is that epigeal or hypogeal?
I can never remember, Jen.
Okay.
We'll have to look that up.
Look that one up. I know this. I know
So
this.
do I, and I always confuse them. Nevin should be here. He would know.
No, he doesn't. He asks me. Okay.
So you just have to be, not necessarily soil temperature,
Yeah.
but you have to make sure that if you put them in the wetter soils, you don't get a crust.
Yeah.
The crusting is a problem.
So rolling? It doesn't actually matter if harvest height is high, hey? It's not such a...
Don't worry about rolling.
Okay.
Because rolling is usually for harvestees at the other end, right? And because the pods are higher on the plant, we don't worry too much about it. In, like in 2021, when it was pretty dry, the pods were fairly low because the plants were only this tall, right? But
so it's a bit relative.
But the pods are still concentrated at the top of the plant, so not as much of a big deal. But something that maybe I'd like to take a look at and just see what the impact of rolling has on something that tends to be a bit woodier and with a different type of emergence.
Could be some learnings from dry beans, definitely.
Yeah, for sure.
If we think about seed treatments, now because lupin's a new crop, there's not a lot of registrations and minor use, and we are working kind of with yourself and with LPI, which is a company who is really invested in growing the lupins in Alberta, as well as the Prairie Pest Minor Use Consortium, PPMUC, with Ron Pitzgalny and others, to make sure that we are slowly working towards getting those registrations. But in the meantime, are there seed treatments available?
We have been playing around with the ones that we would put onto our peas.
Okay.
So I don't think we have anything truly registered.
Okay.
But the products that we have been using, that we use for our peas and faba beans, work very well.
Okay.
So not 100% sure where we're at with registrations on seed treatments, Jen. I actually can't answer that.
Okay.
Don't know.
I can't either.
Yeah, I'm not sure where we're at with that. I'm a little bit more familiar with some of the post-seed stuff, right?
Wait, so let's transition to that. So there are 2 products registered?
There are a number of grassy weed herbicides kind of registered. The main one, would be like your Sure or your Post, and some of those. There's a couple more I can't think of right now, but the grassy ones, I think we have quite a bit.
Okay.
It's the broadleaves where we're struggling. Right now, as far as registrations, we have some for pre-seeding, right? Like we have some products that we can do. Like I know Edge is one that's registered prior to lupins for pre-seeding. And Express SG is one we're playing around with, but it's currently not registered that I'm aware of. And again, heat is another one that we're looking at pre-seed. So we definitely have some options there. As far as in crop, we really only have metribuzin.
Okay.
Was Sencor, also known as, I think they call it Squadron now, is one that really we know is safe to use. And besides that, we're testing all kinds of stuff to see what we have at our place.
It's a process, isn't it, when you bring something new in, and sometimes the timeline. So we always have to be thinking kind of ahead of the game. And we're really lucky because you're very familiar with that space from your faba bean work and other stuff. Yeah. Okay, so working on crop protection products. My understanding is we don't see a lot of disease yet. It's a new crop, so that's not unusual.
Yeah.
If we look outside of Canada to, kind of Australia, Europe, are there diseases that we could foresee coming, like learnings from those areas?
Yeah, one of the ones that they talk about a lot in Australia and Europe is anthracnose.
Okay.
It has the potential to be quite devastating to those crops. We have seen it on the white lupins, so far not on the blues.
Okay.
And it's been a bit more variety specific too. We have some varieties that are in the wetter years, especially. We had some plots in Manitoba, for instance, and they just got decimated by anthracnose. So that's one we need to keep an eye on. Sclerotinia is one that I personally have seen in a wet year. Especially, I think it was 2019, we were playing around with them a little bit, and Sclerotinia moved in and made a mess. But that's one, when you talk to the Europeans and Australians, they're like, not an issue. So that's
Okay.
that's why it's important to bring them here and
Right,
test them
things
here
here.
and see what happens, because they're not concerned at all about some of the things that we're like, yeah, this is a problem here. So
Okay,
Yeah.
cool. So lots of learning, kind of. Well, definitely, it's a process, right? And so
Yeah.
we're partway through it. Desiccation, that would be the other kind of big management practice.
yeah.
And do we need to desiccate? I'm assuming so, because it's a bit of a longer season.
Yeah, desiccation is something that I think is going to be very important. What's interesting though is some of the products that we're looking at for peas. Like for peas, I just say, wait till they get to the right stage, hit them with Reglum, go in 5 to 7 days later, you know, depending on the weather. Lupins, because they have such a tough, woody stem, they sometimes need a little bit more time to dry out the stems, because what happens is the pods can be really ripe and the stems can still be quite green.
Okay.
Especially in lower spots in the field, right? Not necessarily in your higher spots. Everything seems to nicely,
So I'm going to say the word. Is this a crop we may want to consider swathing to dry down those stems?
I would be very nervous swathing them
shattering.
because of the potential shattering that could happen. I think we're better off just making sure we get that desiccation timing accurate, so that the seed is mature enough that you're not going to lose it to early desiccation, but not too late either, because then you dry it out, you hit the greener, tougher stems with the combine header and the cutter bar, and all of a sudden lupins are going flying because they're too ripe, right? So that's one thing that we've been playing around with a little bit. So Reglo might not be the best option to get in there and quickly dry them down. We might have to look at some other desiccation options. But of course you got to be careful when you start, using products such as glyphosate as a desiccant. It's not a dessiccant. It's used in the industry, as kind of a dry down type product. But you got to be careful, because then we might not have, that seed might not be. Yeah, you can't reuse that seed. You can't grow it out. It damages it. So
lots of learning still.
Yeah, there's still some learning to do on that one. I think we can maybe desiccate earlier than we thought we could. But again, something we need to play around with just a little bit more.
Okay.
So,
So maybe kind of to do a bit of a summation, can you tell us, in your opinion, in terms of the feasibility of like lupins being available for me on my farm to grow, how far out do you think we are?
I think we're probably at least 3 to 5 years out.
Okay.
Like 3 years being very, very optimistic, as if, things go really, really well in the next few years. And 5 years maybe is a potential. And it just kind of depends maybe there's some unforeseen things we're going to come up against. But we have, like I said, we have some growers that are interested in growing them, and we've been working with them closely on a small level. We're learning a lot more. I think the potential for lupin is definitely there, but of course we need a really strong agronomic package that we're still struggling to nail down, and we need a market, and we need companies to support that market, right? So those are maybe the things that need to evolve. We need to make sure that we can grow them successfully, put them into the hands of the farmers so that they are also successful, and then that we have someplace we can reliably sell them.
Well, and I think that's coming, right?
Definitely.
Maybe not as fast as some of us are wanting.
Yeah, there's been so much buzz, Jen, and I think everybody wants lupins.
Well, and it's hard, right? It's so exciting, if there's something that Phanomyces doesn't impact, and there's some opportunity maybe for some closed loop contracts, which is kind of the framework that lupins are being grown in right now. We need to build up seed stock, because it is European varieties, like you mentioned, coming in. So we need to make sure that they can go. We know there's lots of potential with the protein highway.
For sure.
So it's kind of a super exciting time, and yet we're proceeding cautiously to make sure that we nail it, because we want to nail it.
Well, what we don't want to happen is, hey, we got this crop, and the farmers try to grow it, and then they come back and they say, well, I have this concern and that concern. And now I'm not growing that. And you kill an industry before it starts. Don't really want to do that. So sometimes I feel kind of mean when I'm like, no, I'm not just going to randomly give seed out to play with, because I don't want a bad taste left in farmers' mouths.
Well, and we need to make sure that we do it well and appropriately, because we're here for I think, it's like the same thing when you're talking to your kids about making a decision. Okay, this decision will impact you for the long term. Yes. So we're going to play the long game on this one. And
we want our farmers to be successful. So we need to set them up for success with all the right information.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Well, I'm really happy that you're involved in that conversation, Robyne, and that you are leading for Western Canada, really. There's not really anybody leading lupin research.
It's pretty exciting.
In the same capacity. So thanks for coming in and chatting with me today.
Thank you for inviting me, Jen. This was great.
It was awesome.
Okay, thanks.